Hey, Mansoor, thank you for coming in. You just have really an amazing and outstanding background, both from your early days in your schooling to things like Imperial College and engineering to contributions and impact. And you continue to do that, but also as an entrepreneur, as a founder. So just really remarkable. I mean, you're so young yet. I can imagine where your career arc is going. So I really appreciate you coming in. I mean, you really have the largest new energy company in the world. So you're breaking new ground in many different aspects. So again, thank you for sharing your insights with our audience.
Thanks, Stephen. So thank you so much for having me and your very kind words. And by the way, I always enjoy having conversations with you. So I'm really intrigued to see where this conversation results. And I remember last time we spoke, we somehow ended up in like chess algorithms. I don't know how that happened, but so I look forward to the outcome of this conversation.
So Mansoor, one of the questions I always ask, and because my audience actually is largely CEOs and founders, I would say that that's the largest buckets, and then we have professors and things like that in there as well, and engineers. So it's typically a typical audience, but very senior. And people are always sort of curious, and that is, what were the inflection points in your life? And maybe it's two or three. It could have been when you were really young. It could have been from your family or mentors, or in school or afterwards. Maybe two or three inflection points that really made this wonderful career that you have, and you're continuing to grow.
I think I had a pretty unusual upbringing in the sense that I'm from Pakistan, but I only lived in Pakistan for a very short period of time. And then I moved to Sweden, to a very small university city called Umeå, where my dad worked at the university there, and he had done his PhD there before. And we were the only Pakistani family in the entire city. And I still remember going to school, the daycare center. I was probably like 3 or 4 years old at the time, going to the daycare center and not understanding a single word, but kind of understanding what people meant by what they said without understanding what they're exactly saying. And I think that sort of ability to read people's emotions or read people's intent without understanding the words, I think I've thought about this a lot. And I think that comes from that sort of forceful learning of a language while still trying to understand what the hell are people saying. So I think that sort of a clash in your brain did something slightly different from day zero. The other thing as well, I think, is that growing up, Sweden being a very developed place, a very innovative place, and Pakistan, where I came from, having many developmental challenges. As I grew up, and I had the fortune of going between Pakistan and Sweden quite often, right? So I was very connected with Pakistan growing up. Sort of those thoughts started coming to my head. Why is it that some people have this and other people don't? And also starting to realize that a lot of what I have or people have is just related to when or where you were born, and so to what parents you were born, all things that are sort of, you can't actually decide yourself, right? Like it's a probabilistic outcome. Something really felt super unfair about that sort of context coming in place. And but at the same time, like growing up, I was always intrigued by technology, right? Like I think one of the sort of the things that really helped me in Sweden was that we were probably one of the earliest users of internet at home, and it was really about like contacting family, right? Like when emails came out and stuff like that. I remember in 1995, my dad sending an email to a Pakistani university. They would print it out and hand it over to my granddad, right? And my granddad would write it in like the guy at university that my dad knew would type it back into the computer and email it back to us. It's like a quasi fax machine, but cheaper version of that, right? So that sort of like the technology is such an equalizer. It was a very, very early realization. And I think that sort of combination of things where I started seeing technology as an equalizer for opportunity, an equalizer for actually giving people access to a life quality in a more democratic way. I think that's what made me an engineer, frankly speaking, because my drive was always about how can I build a product, or how can I build a solution that's useful or helpful to people. That's what actually sort of drove me into studying engineering eventually. So I think those, from my early childhood, that sort of combination of have-nots and haves, and that sort of aspect of being exposed to how technology can radically change lifestyle, was something that was quite instrumental in, I think, in my decisions afterwards, if that makes sense.
I mean, it's a fascinating story arc, right? You're in Sweden, you're in an environment where you don't speak the language, so you got to try to intuit what people are talking about.
Yeah.
And from that would actually make you quite creative, I guess. You know, different parts of your brain would have to be activated to encompass, you know, the meaning behind words and forming those associations. And that cognitive load would have an advantage, I think, from an engineering standpoint later. And then you have this aspect of realizing that you have things that other people don't have. And you think, gee, how can I make it more equitable for people? So I can see how this shapes what you're doing now. And so how did you end up going into engineering at Imperial College? Like, what was that path, that process, and to get into Imperial College?
No, I think I think there was a few aspects there which for me was always super exciting. I loved math growing up. Like I genuinely had a passion for math, right? Going to different math competitions. If there was a math club at my high school, I would have joined it. I really loved all aspects of math, because in some ways, like, it's sort of a universal language, right? And there's something extremely satisfying, and I'm sure I know you know this. So something extremely satisfying about solving problems mathematically, right? But so actually what I wanted to study was pure maths, right? So I just wanted to do pure maths, and like the best documentary I'd ever seen was Fermat's Last Theorem. Like, you should really watch this. There's a Panorama BBC documentary, I think from the late 90s, about the guy that solved Fermat's Last Theorem in Cambridge. But I started realizing that math is sort of in my head, it's a very introspective study, right? Like, it's an introspective, it's very satisfying in my own head, but how can I actually use that for external purposes above and beyond me? So that was the way I was thinking about math being an internal thing, while maybe engineering is the external realization of that math. So that's how I came to a conclusion. I should do engineering, right? And then I was like, okay, what sort of engineering should I do? So I went to this open day at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. It's called KTH in Swedish, Kungliga Tekniska Huset. And I asked this really stupid question to the guy that was sort of walking us around. I asked him, like, which branch of engineering is the most mathematical? And he told me, like, he sort of stopped and, like, I thought about it, and he said, probably electrical and electronical engineering is probably the most mathematical. And I asked this question 2 or 3 other people as well, and I got roughly the same answers, or electrical and electronical engineering, or computer science engineering, or things like that, right? I don't know if that's true or not. This can become a hotly debated topic, but that was the influences that I had at the time. So like, okay, done. I'm going to apply for electrical engineering, electronical engineering, and then I started looking at like what are the places where people have really strong math departments, but they also do engineering. And then I came across Imperial. They had like a few field medalists, and they also had a Nobel Prize. And it was in London, and they were doing engineering. So it was really from the angle of doing math that I ended up at applying to Imperial. And then I'd selected doing electrical and electronical engineering at that point only because it was the most mathematical topic that I thought that I could potentially use to be able to exert my mathematicalness, if that's a if that's a word, to actually make something in the future. I didn't know what to make, but that was the sort of the pathway there. And I was lucky enough to have the grades and must have done reasonably okay at the interview to get in. And honestly, also the excitement of London as well. Like, coming from a small town in Sweden. When I say small town, it was a population of 110,000 people, the biggest employer being the university, to move to London. It's a that in itself, I think, is a brain development boom taking place. So that's how I landed at studying electrical engineering, electrical and electronic engineering, I should say, at Imperial after high school.
That's fascinating. I would probably say engineering physics actually even has more math.
Oh God, if I hadn't met you 20 years ago, I would have been done engineering physics. That's what I would have done.
Yeah, the thing though is electrical engineering is more practical. I think normally people, if they go into engineering physics, then they go into research, right? And whereas you have practical aspects. So I think electrical engineering is second in math, but it's very practical. So it's a better fit if you want to change the world, right?
Yeah. So it was really from the angle of math. I just thought that maybe wrongly so at the time. I just thought math was a very internal process because, when you design something, you can share it, you can talk it, you can discuss it. If you solve a math problem, the likelihood is that it's only enjoyable for yourself. It's not. So that was like, of course, that's wrong. There's lots of really useful math being used everywhere, but that was my childish approach to my educational selection criteria.
So how did you meet Christopher and Laurent? Were they like lab partners, or you just sort of became friends? What's that story?
Yeah, look, I think like I've always been, I like to think, extremely social. And I think that's maybe like the small town thing, right? You are social, you say hi to people and things like that. Even in Sweden, as people might think people are a little bit colder than average, people are warmer in small towns than big towns, I think globally speaking. So actually I met Chris and Laurent during my first day of my first year, sitting in the same row during our first class of university, right? So they both were sitting next to me, and I just started chatting. Chris was from the UK, and Laurent was from Belgium with a really, really thick, like French, Belgian, English accent. So it took me a while to fully decode what he was saying initially. And that was sort of, I just hit it off, and we had our first class, and then we went for lunch, and we somehow ended up in the same friendship circles later on as well. So it's I sometimes joke with people. I should joke with my wife sometimes. What would have happened to my life if I had sat somewhere else?
I mean, yeah, I mean, they become your co-founders too. So really this friendship forms. Do they have the same love of math, or are their orientations different?
No, I think like that's where business sort of comes in. I think like where years later when we decided to actually start a business, Bboxx, but there was a thing before that. While being at university, I sort of stumbled upon. I think I was looking for a problem to solve. If I'm really honest about it, I was really looking for the problem I should solve, and I was considering like going into research, my dad being an academic, I was always sort of a little bit influenced by that pathway, right? So I was looking at like what are interesting maybe research topics I should go into. Maybe I should do a PhD myself after university, etc. But I sort of stumbled upon quite literally a magazine in the library during my second year of studies, and it was a Times magazine, and there was an advert about Rolex in it, of all things. And this advert about Rolex is that Rolex has this foundation, and it had given an award to an NGO in Nepal to provide access to electricity to a small community. So I thought nothing so much about the ad itself, the fact that it's given an award, big companies do that. But there was a number there that shocked me, which was that 1.6 billion people around the world have no electricity. And I'm like, what? Well, no one ever told me this, right? Like, and then and I just couldn't get rid of this. I looked at it like, what? And then I checked with my friends, like, like a third of mankind have no electricity, and people like, nah, that's not true, or like it's a bit of a shocking fact. I started googling it. I started getting obsessed by this topic, and this obsession got to a level where I was like, man, I need to do something about this. But I'm like a 18, 19-year-old student. What can I really do? So at the time, like I had a lot of friends studying medicine at Imperial as well. And during their summer break, maybe similar in Canada, there's a sort of culture among medics in the UK at least, where they tend to volunteer somewhere abroad for the summer, or there's lots of ways for them to actually use the skill sets that they've already learned to apply it somewhere useful. I'm like, why can't we do the same as engineers? Like, let's pick a place that does not have electricity and give electricity, right? That's the mission. So that's how we started Equinox, which is a sort of student-run charity, which actually still runs today at Imperial. And this is where Chris and Laurent became more than friends, right? They became co-creators, co-founders, and there was other people involved as well, other students involved as well, to really try to think about how can we bring this classroom learning that we have and apply that into reality, and also starting to realize people's different skill sets. I don't know, when you sort of grow up, you have like this, everyone is like in a treadmill or sort of a very box situation, but it's only when you do something truly creative do people are able to like express their strengths that they can bring to the collective outcome. That when you do something totally unscripted, right? And in this sort of super unscripted environment of creating this organization called Equinox, I really learned more about Chris and Laurent and how complementary they were, right? Like Laurent being this super detail orientated operational guy, right? Like he loves the detail, right? Like Chris being that super technical guy, like the product is not ready until the product is ready, right? Like he will go through 7 iterations to get that perfection. And I think what I started realizing that my childhood daydreaming can also be professionalized into creating vision, creating culture, creating purpose, creating drive, creating organization, which I never realized that I had that within me. So I think like that creation of Equinox, I often say this, I probably learned more from creating Equinox at university than my degree itself, to my mom's detriment probably, but like so that's how I learned more about Chris and Laurent. And I think I learned more about what it takes to take a problem, turn that into a need, turn that into an organization, and actually try to operationalize that on the ground. So that was my sort of lucky story, right? Like again, if I found a different magazine that day, maybe this would never have happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's this interesting sort of synchronicity, this confluence of things that happen in your life, and and maybe it was meant to be in some way. Maybe there's some kind of entanglement occurring in the fabric of whatever is out there that causes these influences to come together, because it's really interesting. I mean, Equinox and some of the ideas behind it are really behind Bboxx, which is much later, right? So, and with the same partners. So that's an interesting path. So we'll mine that a little bit later. But I want to talk about what you did right after university. So you worked at Rolls-Royce, but your future partners, your partners in Equinox didn't follow you, right? They went their own separate ways, and then you come back together. Did you maintain that friendship in the background so that you could come back together? You know, what's that story?
Yeah, we were friends first, right? I like, being in a doing so many group projects and socials and things like that. We're good friends, and we still are, luckily today. So I think there was also an aspect of growing up. You need to get a job, right? Like so. And Imperial were quite lucky, like to be able to be quite sought after. And I know this is not so common in North America, from what I've learned, but at some of the better universities in the UK, you tend to get your job lined up in your third year of study before you graduate on your fourth year. So I got employed by Rolls-Royce in my third year of studies. So that normally means that they give you some sort of a student grant towards your studies, and they give you an internship during the summertime, and as long as you don't mess up the internship and you get your degree, etc., you have a job guaranteed at the end of that process. So it's sort of the graduate program. It's a pretty British thing. So during my third year, I signed a contract with Rolls-Royce to become part of them. And honestly, I was very intrigued by Rolls-Royce because, again, when I was thinking about like the childish side of me, right? Like, what is the from a British perspective, or from a world perspective, what is the thing that probably has created the most sort of harmony in the world? I really think it's travel, right? Like, travel has opened the eyes to so many things, and so and that things can fly still. I mean, amazing to me in my head. And so when I was looking at different options and I considered different things, I was just fascinated by Rolls-Royce, of its industrial scale and what that industrial scale results in. I mean, so when I was talking Rolls-Royce, I'm talking about the aviation business, just to be clear here. And I was lucky enough, actually, when I was at Rolls-Royce, that I had like an engineering internship, an engineering thing, but there's always people along the way that sort of are more experienced than you, that are able to tell you what you truly are without you realizing yourself, right? Maybe you've experienced that in your life too. So there was one guy, Andrea Pisoni was his name, my first manager that I ever had. It's like, man, you should not be doing engineering. Do business development or sales, right? That's more like, use your engineering skills for that. So I ended up going into their leadership program that was more focused on business development and sales and things like that, and then ended up in Hong Kong. So honestly, I didn't really listen so much about what I should be doing. When he mentioned that you could go to Hong Kong, I'm like, I'll make the coffee. Let's just send me to Hong Kong. And so everything after that blanked out for me. So I was lucky. Like, within a few months of joining the company, they moved me over to Hong Kong, and again, like, running an engineering organization of a complexity so big sort of kind of reminded me of Equinox, right? Like, people are trying to solve problems, different skill sets coming together. But more than that, it really opened my eyes to China, right? Like how enormous China really truly is, and how much progress they have done in such a short period of time, and like how important that progress that's been done in China could be relevant for the rest of the world, right? So I couldn't stop thinking about like the haves and haves not, and the fact that China has solved a large part of that, has improved that more than most, if not anyone, in the shortest period of time. And particularly but at a huge energy cost, right? Like coal power, bad air. I remember in Hong Kong, even some days there was you kind of had to wear a mask, or recommended to at least, or stay indoors and things like this. So in China, people started talking about renewables, started talking about green tech. You know, the first time I learned about energy transition or green tech was not in London, in the UK. I learned that first in Hong Kong, and in China, like that conversation about how do we clean up the air. Um, and, 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 and then reminding me about Equinox and what we did in Africa and things. That was sort of the Rolls-Royce journey in, and also like what I really owe Rolls-Royce a lot still today is giving me the opportunity to learn about China. And I think that's something I've benefited enormously since then. Sorry for the long-winded way of getting to that topic.
So I can see again this the story arc, right? You come from Sweden. You have this language kind of assimilation issue, and then and it becomes a challenge, and it causes you to grow, and then you end up at Imperial because you have this love of mathematics, and you're trying to combine, where can I study mathematics, maybe do something practical as well. You ended up with electrical engineering or electronic engineering, and there you meet your what turns to be your business partner, but also your best friends. You then separate because you go off in this internship sort of program that the UK colleges have, where you're actually already sort of courted to join companies and so on. So you end up at Rolls-Royce, and that gives you the ability to go to Hong Kong, and it opens up this whole new way of thinking for you and possibilities. Plus, it further accentuates your management capabilities, of which you saw the early signs with Equinox, right? You have one partner who's really good from the operational side. You got one partner who's really good on the product development side. And then you're good at the visionary strategy, you know, the overall sort of piece. So now you have these three friends, and you're in different locations. And then what was the catalyst for you to come together over 10 years ago and form this thing called Bboxx, which is really an acceleration of what you did with Equinox?
Yeah, funny thing, I got a promotion. So my promotion was to move to Chicago, right? So I went to Chicago for the interview, and it was great. I mean, it was fantastic. Like, great colleagues, great, like, you know, next things. And in my head, the thought I had was that if I do this, I'm gonna be here for a long time, right? And there's and with me and Chris and Laurent, we were always in touch, etc. And Laurent had already started thinking about leaving his PhD. He was doing a PhD at Imperial afterwards, and doing something more practical, etc. So Laurent was the first one to actually quit his job. He's like, okay, I'm going to quit my job to try to see if we can set up this Bboxx thing. So we made an arrangement where we were like spending our evenings on Bboxx, spending our salary to support. Me and Chris were working, and we would use our salary to be able to support Laurent to get the first few things moving. And then once things started becoming real, we had a website, we had like a supplier. I was still in Hong Kong at the time, so I was able to go into during weekends to some suppliers to look at solar panels and batteries and things like this, etc. And at that point, I'm like, man, like I'm too distracted. So like clearly my heart is at this, but my sort of the rational thing is to continue the sort of the career path I'm on, which looks quite attractive at the time. I was 23 or 24 years old at the time. So what I had to do was, I come from a Pakistani background, so I can't just like send a notice to my employers. I quit my job and moved to doing Bboxx. My parents would quite literally kill me in the most legal way possible. They wouldn't do anything illegal, of course. but so I had to. I remember the first pitch I ever made was to my mom and my dad. They're like, "This is why I want to quit my job. This is like the stuff that I want to do." And I also had to ask for them. Like, I need like $15,000 or $20,000. I think it was $20,000. I asked them, "Can I borrow $20,000?" Because clearly I was spending all my salary money on stupid things at the time. My mom only had one question actually at the end, which was like, "Who will marry you?" Says like that worked out separately, anyways. So my mom was actually my first investor, and I got and that was quite important to me to make sure that like my parents were willing for me to do something quite unorthodox, and actually support me of setting up give me some money to actually leave my job, and we all sort of moved to China illegally, more or less, on tourist visas. And we had this one supplier that we started getting into more and more conversations with, and started helping us make our product, etc. So we quite literally moved into that supplier. So there's a small place called Fushan in Guangdong, outside Guangzhou city, like an hour and a half away. So we all were in this small solar panel manufacturer in Fushan, and that's how sort of the today's Bboxx story began. And it was, I think, equally adventurous for all of us. For Chris to quit his job, he had his story. For Laurent to quit his PhD into it, he had his stories. But I think there was something at that point of being young and still like really believing in it, and also thinking about like, what do we have to lose? Like, and also the sense of adventure of doing it. Like it's I don't know, the equivalent of trying to go to space. I've never tried to go to space, but it was something really, really adventurous about doing that, right? Like, and that became sort of the starting point of Bboxx.
So Bboxx is now, tremendously successful. Definitely one of the most successful new energy companies in the world. And so you got these partners coming together, your friends from college, from the first day of class, in essence, right?
Exactly.
You do a proof of concept in a sense when you have Equinox, and then you come back many years later and you form Bboxx. So what is Bboxx at that time? What did Bboxx look like? What did Bboxx look like when you were deploying in a particular village in Africa, and then it spreads to 11 countries in Africa? And then what does Bboxx look as sort of mid-career, mid-maturity, and what does Bboxx look today? And then what it's going to look like in 3 years. So first of all, you come together, you got product. What do you do with that product?
So solar back then in 2010, 2008, every solar installation you did was a project. And our realization was that if you make something a project, you need the skills, it's costly, you have to source different things, there's expertise, etc. So our sort of gut feel was like, how can we turn that project into a product, a standardized product that's sort of copy and paste? So in our head, it was about really the battery and the box, hence the name Battery Box. So how can we so Bboxx is really a spin on the battery box, that sort of commoditization that we want to do. How can we squeeze in everything that we need into the battery box, right? So the only thing that the consumer has to do is to like literally like put in the solar panel, and on the other side it has a socket like anything else, like as intuitive as that. So you don't have to mess around with wires and fuses and whatever not, right? That you had to do at the time. So it was about making solar kits. So that was our first sort of product, which was that we made a series of very standardized solar kits that were plug and play. And it worked really well. We would approach distributors, we would approach customers that are NGOs or people that have houses with power cuts, all sorts of different user cases. They were just buying our products and selling that to the retail market. And it was super simple for consumers to do because they got something in a box, they put a solar panel on the roof, and it's enough for basic lighting, basic radio, basic phone charging. That was the sort of the first package that we put into market. And that might not sound too revolutionary today, but at the time, that was a kind of a big deal, like that sort of supply chain optimization and getting that into the side. On the software side, there's a lot of things around the battery management system, which were really like funky at the time. We were like at the intersection of like lithium being too expensive, lead acid being too unreliable, and you had like lots of funky batteries going on. So nickel-based batteries, like lead acid with gel, lead acid solid, all sorts of weird stuff going on. So a lot of our sort of engineering effort was the BMS being the battery management system being a general battery management system that we could use multiple different types of flavors of battery depending on the user cases. That problem doesn't exist anymore. That's been completely standardized. So that was like our engineering challenge at the time. Then we started realizing that, okay, great, we managed to solve this problem of project to product, and we managed to also standardize this product, and knowing like what type of customer that you are, we can also recommend the chemistry of the battery that you should be using, right? So that was our initial proposition. But we realized that our market that we were able to reach, even in significantly reducing both the soft costs and the accessibility to product, was that the upfront cost for most people was too high. Even if the kit cost $200, $300 for light and phone charging, etc., most people don't have $200, $300, and the panel prices and battery prices were a lot higher back then. So the same thing today costs like $40, right? It used to cost $200, $250 10 years ago, and so then we started realizing, hey, okay, like what can we do that is a bit different? And again, Rolls-Royce strikes again, which is that at Rolls-Royce, one thing that I learned was that no one buys a plane, right? Everything is fly by the hour. So there's like financing companies that buy the plane, and then it would like, I don't know, Air Canada as an example. I'm going to be guessing that they have a similar arrangement, and that Air Canada basically pays the actual owner of the plane a price per hour used. And that price per hour used could also include all the maintenance, all the stuff, etc. It's like an all-inclusive price, right? So it's like, it was called fly by the hour arrangements, right? So it's like, what if we applied the same sort of business model to our customer group, right? So we can install something in our households, and we could collect money over time to be able to actually do that. So in some way, it was not a new thinking, because microfinance in Africa was an established thing to begin with. But the problem with microfinance at the time was that you had to do large loans, or reasonably large loans, because the cost of collecting money, of physically collecting cash, etc., there was a cost of distribution, cost of collecting. But that's where we got really lucky. We were lucky with our timing, which is that the appearance of M-Pesa in Kenya in early 2011, 2012, which is that this digital wallet, which allows two phones to make a payment, right? And it was spreading like wildfire in places like Kenya and Rwanda, right? I think like majority of Kenya's GDP today is cashless. Somalia has the highest rate of digital payments in the world, right? So there's some really fascinating outcomes of that digital money side. So then when we started realizing that, okay, let's combine these three things together: mobile money, the product that we have, and the third thing, IoT. So if we can put IoT into the system, so remote monitoring, remote control, switching things on and off, use the cellular network that's been built out in Africa, So we could actually install a system. People can pay using mobile money. When they pay, the system turns on. When they don't pay, the system turns off. So it becomes pay as you go. And to my great personal surprise at the time is that the daily cost of that system was cheaper than kerosene, candles, batteries, anything else. So that meant that the consumer group that we could go after was truly the bottom of the pyramid, while previously the consumer group that we could go after was more middle class, like, you know, the urban households, etc. So the size of the market suddenly became a lot bigger. So that three technologies coming together, and today, just to finish that off, is that the ability to switch things on and off, collect payments digitally, and having that IoT data so we can do maintenance forecasting. We have now applied that not just on electricity, so pay-as-you-go electricity, but also on pay-as-you-go water, pay-as-you-go clean cooking, pay-as-you-go internet, pay-as-you-go e-mobility. So the ability to switch things on and off is surprisingly powerful in giving accessibility to fundamental products and services to people across Africa. So that was sort of the growth story that happened from that those elements. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, and the incredible amount of insight that you can gain from the data, right? So normally credit history and things like that we use in the West, it's just not possible in other parts of the world. But you collect so much, or you have so much insight from the data that you can get into all of the financial aspects of it, because you're already in the financial aspects, and you can, I guess, develop credit scores, right?
No, exactly. I think that became the problem of our scale, right? So we were like, okay, we can finance 10 people, but we're only collecting money over time. They're like, oh God, that's a different business model. We need to find some new money so we can first invest in the equipment that we can sort of collect money over time. So as naive as we were just thought that other people would have the data, the understanding, the local banks, the local sort of financial houses. They've been around for a long time. What possible value could we add to the credit underwriting process was our thought. But to my big personal surprise is that they had no data on the customer group, literally no data. They were operating on averages, right? And now we had suddenly this possibility where on an individual level, we could understand the consumption pattern of energy. We could understand the payment pattern seasonally, directly, etc. And suddenly, like, some modern techniques started becoming quite accessible to small companies like us, like cloud computing, being able to deploy some simple machine learning models that actually started giving insights, predictability. So now we could go to banks to say, hey, I've got 10,000 customers here. They've paid me this much, right, so far. I expect them to pay me this much in the future, right? And this is why, right? And this is all of the data backing that up, etc. So, hey, do you want to finance these guys? That conversation was really important for us because that unlocked the financing scale. So that conversation has allowed us to deploy over $200 million in capex financing onto the ground in Africa, right? And involving local banks, international banks, all sorts of different finance houses. And in many cases, we become people's first time Africa investment, not because they never wanted to invest in Africa before, because they never had the data to justify the investment to Africa, right? So I think that the data has unlocked capital for us. On the other side that we've managed to do is that it has allowed us to also develop better products, better services, right? Because this group of customers, the 1.2 billion people in Africa, roughly 60% of them having no electricity at home, and 90% of them being smallholder farmers, etc. There's surprising little amount of information there. And I think going back to my sort of academic influences at home, I realized that we have way more data than we possibly can use for business purposes. So this is why a few years ago, one of the things I'm most proud of is that a few years ago, we approached a few universities and said, hey, we have a bunch of data we're willing to share with you guys, as long as you're willing to put some manpower on it. So we managed to get a research relationship with Stanford University, with Imperial, with Oxford University, and UCL. At UCL, we already have an ongoing research partnership with them. We have co-funded 5 PhDs over the last 6 years that have successfully defended the thesis, largely using Bboxx's database. At Oxford, we have had 1 PhD has completed recently using all of our. I didn't realize that we have one of the biggest data sets on battery data in the world. So using that data to be able to build better battery models. So the guy just recently finished his PhD on that front as well. So we've been able to use that data not just for purely business purposes, credit scoring purposes, but also to try to add a level of academic insights into this. And hopefully our approach to this academic insight is also to bring the level up of the conversation. And I think that's something that Bboxx has quite successfully managed to do in our circles.
So, Mansoor, I could go for another hour. Unfortunately, we only have about 3 minutes left. So,
oh wow.
So I need to get maybe in about a minute and a half, you can sort of describe where you want to go and the kinds of services you're going to be evolving to, which you already have, but you're going to scale, and how you're going to scale this beyond the 11 countries in Africa and really globally. And then the final question would be closing comments. So we got 3 minutes to do those 2 questions.
Sure, I'll be very quick. I think for me, the biggest insight I want any listeners to have is that the most innovative continent on earth today is Africa. It is the continent of leapfrogging solutions. It's a continent that accepted digital money first. It's a continent that accepted mobile telephony first. It's the continent that actually, at the household level, are accepting green energy and clean tech first, right? In a distributed, digital, and decarbonized way. And it's also the continent that will have the youngest majority of the youngest people in the world for a foreseeable future, right? So all of that mixed together, what I really want to do is make sure that we can give access to electricity, water, internet, mobility to every single household that we possibly can reach. And I think it's totally possible to do. And with that comes prosperity. That accessibility drives prosperity from there on. So for me right now, my focus is more services to our customers and to grow more markets. So we're in rapid expansion zone, and that's my main focus at the moment to drive. And a large part of that is HR, training people, hiring people, and getting people into productive positions quickly across. We have 2,000-3,000 employees in the company, and we have a lot more to recruit, and that's a big operational burden in the company today.
Okay, Mansoor, and then now the final question, your final recommendations, and we got about a minute. So to the audience.
My final sort of from a recommendation perspective, like I really, whenever I meet people, I think people don't think about Africa as a place of technology, as a place of innovation. And I often I think people get often surprised that how many solutions could first be scaled on the continent. And that's really, I thought I would love to sort of leave as my closing remarks, if I may say so, is that like really considers like the super innovative things for Africa, because I think you would be surprised, many people will be surprised about how scalable and how adaptable that market is to actually absorb new solutions where there are largely few incumbents.
Well, Mansoor, thank you for coming in today. I mean, there's just so many areas we could go, even into the philosophical side, where we had deep conversations about things like quantum mechanics and so on. So, we've got to do more of these conversations. So, thank you for coming in, and just a marvelous work that you're doing in this dream of equitable access that you had when you were very young, and saying, you know what, we need this diversity, inclusion, and fairness. And you're doing that, right? And equity for all. So thank you again for sharing.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your kind words and all the work you do as well. That's amazing. I'm a big fan.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.